For years, political scientists have struggled with political engagement and social and race identity. Many studies have focused on whether a person's race or social identity has had an effect on whether they choose to vote in elections. What motivates a citizen to choose to vote or forgo their right in the election? Political engagement is a way of a citizen putting their leaders in government and letting them know what they want out of their government. Democracy rests on equal consideration of the needs and preferences of each citizen. Most studies have shown that social and racial identity have influence over a citizen's political engagement. There seems to be a question whether race is more of a choice in social identity. Race is the only non-cultural variables that have consistent impact on voting, reaching significance in each of these elections and having relatively strong effects, according to Lehman. The study of California's Proposition 187 is an example of racial identity making change. California's Proposition 187, which attempted to stop the health care and services for immigrants, was fought back against Mexican Americans. Naturalized citizens struggle for their place in society and are using their vote to take away the hyphenated status of their citizen. Mexican Americans desire inclusion, validation, and protection, which has influenced their conservatism, according to Basler. Hispanics and Mexican origin comprise 2/3 of the Hispanic population in the U.S., and the continued growth could give them more power in the next half of the century. It is the fastest growing minority population. Racial identification influences their voting decision. Group identity theory has happened when memberships of a group can occur when a person identifies with a group's specific policies appealing to their racial identity. Social groups or professional group, races, and ethnic background can all be factors when voting. Political association and individuals' patterns develop through associations with their parents, schools, media, and individuals who they have grown up with or associated with. And Zen has showed that this has more influence on their identity of race. However, a group or family association can be racially acquired, being that the person's social group from their family and or race strongly affects who they are around. African Americans tend to be more politically engaged because of their group associations and their shared group identity, according to Stokes-Brown. Churches and religion have significant influence over a person's position when voting. A prime example of this is when it comes to party divisions. It appears that the Republican Party is becoming the political home for religious traditionalists, while the Democrat Party is becoming increasingly attractive to religious liberals and secularists. This can also influence their choice to vote, when their moral issues are so strong that they feel the need to vote knowing that their vote could change the outcome. The higher levels of engagement may be because of the group's power when asking its citizens to vote. Shared identity within the groups could be the reason, according to Stokes-Brown. The effects of social inequality when voting is used strategically by politicians to influence a group's votes, showing that social theory is used intentionally. Leftists will influence a group's vote by calling on social inequality and the identity of a person to encourage the vote, while rightists, when presenting with a social inequality, will use a group's morals and values to encourage the vote. It may be more difficult to compromise on identities and interests when voters are forced to choose, according to Margaret. Specifically, religious and ethnic groups are targeting when using strategy value moral versus identity. The size of the church and ethnic group can factor in this outcome. The larger the divide of ethnicity and religious groups, the more focused the group of politicians will become. Social exclusion when voting becomes an issue. Leaving a group feeling ignored or left out of issues in legislation, according to Kuo. Exclusion from politics can affect whether a person chooses to exercise the right to vote or use the power to change the vote because of the group's size. Group size social identity is more powerful than individual identity, giving the group more power for political and attitude change, according to Basler and Kuo. An individual can be influenced to politically engage when asked to do so by their group, Stokes-Brown. An example, Asians and Latinos and other minority groups feel as if their voices need to be met by parties and therefore are less likely to vote for those parties and more likely to vote on issues. Asians feel excluded based on their appearance, which can make them resentful as they desire acknowledgement and to be included in American social fabric, according to Kuo. This exclusion has led to a completely different approach when voting preferences in African and Asian Americans. Democrat and Republican parties have different racial cues, which Asian populations evaluate their interests and tend to vote more on issue-based as opposed to party-based. There is the additional factor of naturalized citizens versus a natural-born citizen within the race. This changes the outcome of political engagement and identity. National origin is tied to differences in history and life. A citizen who is an immigrant will be more likely to have political associations with their race or culture. The relocation of the person usually has a direct effect within the groups they affiliated. Needs and wants are different within the immigrant community. Racial groups are established for social needs, especially for new immigrants. The political socialization process through which individuals develop their political orientants, according to Kuo, can be developed during the process of naturalization. Zen's research goes a little deeper, showing that immigrants tend to vote more policy-based, whereas naturalized citizens tend to vote more democratic. However, both forms of citizens still vary on their level of voting. When examining political engagement, there are factors that can have an impact on a person's choice to exercise the right to vote. The two most important issues are social identity and race. Within the categories of social identification and race, there are also subcategories. Reviewing as many as possible should give a better idea of why people choose to vote or choose not to vote.